Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Terry, thanks so much for that. So comprehensive and informative, and really a pleasure to listen to. I'm sorry for the grilling. Also for me personally, nice to hear someone speaking Canadian at the annual meeting. If I wasn't so interested, I find myself slipping into vacation mode from time to time. Terry is a very busy man, and quite often when I'm in Detroit, we find it difficult to sit together just to review the projects. And so for him to give his time to prepare, and obviously a lot of preparation in his presentation, and to travel and to support us here today is a really special thing. So thank you for that. Terry knows that a few years ago I had an ongoing contact with Alan Mullally, the president and chairman of Ford Motor Company, and we addressed CGI, and we addressed the diesels, and we addressed pickups, but he also wanted to talk about how Ford treats SinterCast as a supplier. And I told him that indeed Ford treats us fairly and equally, and he was genuinely happy to receive that feedback. And he thinks that the supplier relationship is so important. We have a lot of contacts at Ford, on the design side and the material side, machining, and Terry's casting ops team. But Terry is the lead contact for us at Ford. And so really nice to have him here in Stockholm and be able to spend a little bit of time outside of the normal work environment as well. Well, today let's do what we normally do. We start by looking at the current status in terms of the production and the installations, and then we can go on and look forward at the market development. And over the last years, we've been using a plot like this, showing the development over a 5-year period. And you see that in 2009, coming out of the downturn, the volume was low, and we've had a good and stable growth, peaking at 1.6 million engine equivalents at the end of 2012, and currently now at 1.3 million engine equivalents. So, and those of you who have seen the first quarter report, you know that we were down at, the fourth quarter report from 2012, we were down at 1.2, so the increase now to 1.3 in first quarter represents an 8% growth. And this difference between 1.6 million and 1.3 million, that 300,000, it's interesting to see where that comes from. And if we look at our product mix, traditionally we've had cars, and this is cylinder blocks, and trucks, which is both block and head, and then what we classify as other components. And others means automotive components like exhaust or clutch components, but also industrial power. And traditionally we've run quite a good balance in this with almost equal car and truck. But currently the mix has changed quite a lot. And we can see that even though we've had this 300,000 decrease in our production, 330,000 of that is from the truck sector. So it's very easy for us to isolate the problem area. And I think it's also good because it shows that the remaining products have resisted the difficult economy here in Europe really well, and indeed have had a net growth, a small net growth. We've seen this type of pattern before where we had a growth and then we get hit. And if we look over a longer term, a 7-year profile, we see the growth in the early days and a hit. And then we recovered and another hit. And of course these hits are painful both for the shareholders and for those of us inside of the company. And there's nothing to do but to put the head down and start rebuilding. We can explain the development of this curve with the individual products. In the early years, back in 2007, the contribution was primarily from the Ford and the Audi V6s. And at the end of 2007, we started to see a growth, and that was from the European commercial vehicles coming on stream. Obviously, at the end of 2008, we had the economic downturn, and we suffered from that. And then we started to grow again, and that growth wasn't a recovery, because the European programs and the American programs were still quite low. And this was the Ford V8, the 6.7 liter that Terry referred to, coming on stream and ramping up. And that grew for about 2 years, and toward the end of this growth profile, we had the Navistar 13 liter starting in production, and again showing the peak at the end of 2011, early 2012. And what happened then in 2012? When we were here a year ago, we were standing on a high. We had had 13 consecutive quarters of positive growth, and I can remember cautioning the shareholders that we saw that the Navistar pipe was becoming full, and the volume in the second quarter would depend very much on the shipment timing, when we took the annualized production in June. And within 2 months after the AGM, we had the surprise of the Navistar program. And that was, as many of you know now, that it failed the EPA emissions testing. And it effectively went to zero. So our second largest program almost disappeared. And that's the main reason for the decrease in the volume through 2012. The second reason, because it wasn't all Navistar, but it was all truck. And the second reason was European trucks. And our two main programs for MAN and for DAF, those are dual sourced. They're shared between a European foundry and a SinterCast foundry. And the European foundry was the development partner, and they are the primary source, so they're guaranteed in a way some initial volume. And our foundry takes the overflow volume. So when the economy hit and the volume shrank, that came primarily away from our supplier, and the first supplier was protected by that. So unfortunately, we know the European economy is down, particularly for trucks, but we got hit a little bit harder than the economy did alone. We do see this upturn, so we've got a recovery now, and the signals are really positive. We see Navistar now is refilling the pipe. The engine has been approved for production. It passed the EPA testing, so we'll refill that pipe. And we have the North American diesel programs coming on stream. So all of the signals are positive, and whereas last year we gave a caution that perhaps the volume might go down in second quarter, it's reasonable to expect it to increase this year. We can also use this plot to look at the compounded growth rate. And the compounded growth rate is a difficult calculation because it depends as much on where you start as it does on where you are today, and one can always cherry pick. And rather than doing that, we've chosen the starting point of either 2007 or 8 or 9, and you can see that we're somewhere in the area of 20 to 30%. So it's a really good growth, but we know that it needs to be better, and we'll keep pushing at that. Let's look then at the growth opportunities, and we can begin that by reviewing our existing plans. Last year at the AGM, we said that the programs currently in production had the potential to provide more than 2 million engine equivalents when everything was up and mature. And that's still the case today. There's no reason why the programs currently running can't get back up and then over 2 million. Particularly with a little bit of help from the diesel take rates in North America and a little bit of help from the European economy and truck volumes. Our front runner, and Terry spoke passionately about it, is the Ford 6.7 liter V8. It's running strong and stable, and indeed it's increasing. And I think Terry gave some hints that that volume is expected to continue to grow. So that will be a contributor going forward. And we also have the Via Motori 3 liter V6, and that has been running in Europe for Jeep and for the Chrysler 300. But now we have the newcomers in North America, the Jeep Grand Cherokee and the Ram 1500. And this program is already running more than 100,000 units per year. It's partially pipe filling, and we have to judge how much of it is filling the supply pipe and how much it will be in steady state volume. The pipe is really quite long for this program. The cylinder block and the bed plate are cast in Brazil. They're then shipped to Italy for machining and assembly, and from Italy back to Mexico or the US, depending on which vehicle they go into, and then after vehicle assembly onto the distributor in the showrooms. So it's quite a long pipe, and when we think of what the steady state volume will be, we have to think of the sales volume for the vehicle, but also the diesel take rate. And Terry touched on this a little bit, and I have some plots of North American diesel take rates. This first one is for the Super Duty pickups. So this is the one that the 6.7 liter V8 is in, for example. And we see on the left the volumes for the last 4 years, and the volumes are increasing because of the recovery in the US market. But you see that the take rate is really quite constant at around 60%. And indeed, over the last 12 months, as we see in the trend lines on the right, really quite a stable take at about 60%. We can do the same thing for SUV applications. Again, we see the volumes increasing on the left, but really quite a stable and constant take rate of around 30%. We see in this trend a slight decrease in the middle of 2012. And that coincides with an increase in diesel prices in North America from about $3.70 per gallon to $4 per gallon. So for us, about 6.3 crowns per liter, up to 6.9 crowns per liter. This plot would apply to the Jeep Grand Cherokee, but not necessarily to the Ram 1500. And that's an odd thing, because we have a plot for take rates for Super Duty vehicles, for SUVs, and also for passenger cars, which we'll look at next. But there isn't a plot for light-duty pickups like the F-150. And that's because there isn't a diesel offering in that class of vehicle. And isn't it odd that we have diesels for Super Duty and SUV and cars, but we miss this obvious gap in the middle where it's so well suited? I personally am more confident and looking more forward to the diesel growth. And of course, to the follower reaction, what happens when the Ram 1500 comes to the market, and how the other OEMs, and perhaps the shareholders let Terry off a little bit easy on that one. I won't later. Or I haven't anyway for the last while. So as promised, we can look at the take rate for cars as well. It's similar to SUV, it's around 30%. It's not really that much different from Europe. You know, here in Europe we have about 50% diesels, and when in North America a diesel is available, the take rate is really quite high. Audi has confirmed that it will bring the A6, A7, A8, and Q5 to North America later this year. And that may give us extra volume on the V6. But the interesting thing is to estimate the volumes for the Jeep Grand Cherokee and for the Ram 1500. Those are all incremental volumes, but again, the really interesting thing is the follower volume, what it does to the state of the entire market. So how many Jeeps and how many Rams do we think that we'll sell? Well, it's a function, as I say, of the sales volume of the vehicle and the diesel take rate, but also the price for the diesel option, because the diesel engine will be more expensive because of the added emissions equipment. Jeep is selling currently at around 150,000 units per year. And there are 4 versions, the Laredo, the Limited, the Overland, and the Summit. And the entry version, Laredo, it won't be made available with the diesel. And it takes about 1/3 of the total volume. So that brings us to 100,000. And if we have a 30% take rate, as we saw in the previous charts, that would mean something like 30,000 per year. Again, it depends on the price as well. There is a V6 gasoline option and a V8 option. The diesel will be $4,500 more than the V6 petrol. And if you try to make the payback calculation with the improved fuel economy of the diesel over that option cost, it's really difficult to pay that back over the lifetime of a vehicle. But if you compare it to the V8, and here we have a similar torque for both engines, the on-cost is $1,800, and the fuel economy improvement is quite a lot bigger. So actually, a typical driver could pay it back in something like 2 years. So it's really quite attractive as a comparison to the V8. The Ram, well, Terry mentioned the F-150, and here I have just cut and pasted a plot from Automotive News from the 6th of May, and it shows the vehicles from April 2013, and as Terry said, Ford F-Series is the number one, and not just the number one, but far ahead as the number one. Ram is number 5. The Ram 1500 normally runs around 7th or 8th, but this year it was awarded Truck of the Year in North America. And since then the volumes have been going up quite a lot. And as you can see in the lower half of this plot, Ram is up 40% year on year. So it's running around 350,000, and we don't know what the take rate will be, right? Will it be 30% like cars and SUVs, or will it be 60% like pickups? And again, that depends a lot on the pricing. The price differential has been published for the Jeep, but it hasn't yet been published for the Ram 1500. And I think then I end up on this exactly where Terry finished, which is it's a wait and see. And I think everyone is waiting with quite a lot of anticipation. Whatever it is, it's good, it's added volume, and we have this follower effect to look forward to. The other thing that I'd like to point out on this chart is, as I say, the leadership of the F-Series for Ford, but also that Ford has 3 of the top 10 vehicles. And if you add them up, they're 30% higher than the next highest OEM in the top 10. So Ford has really done great. And I remember some years ago, together with Terry in Windsor, rather than in Detroit that time, and you know, Ford was the only of the Detroit 3 that didn't take federal bailout money. And they came with all this new product, and the share price was going up fantastically. And as Terry said, the blue oval isn't looking so bad anymore. And indeed, the blue oval looks great, and it looks great to us. And imagine having 30 or 60% of the F-Series. And well, you can imagine I throw that pitch every chance we get. Let's look at commercial vehicles. As I said, 2012 was a tough year for us for commercial vehicles. Last year at this time we were running 660,000 engine equivalents. This year we're exactly half, 330,000. So that's that 300,000 drop that I referred to earlier. Running at 330,000, if we think of the total market opportunity, we haven't even scratched the surface. And this in the sector where there is such a need for higher strength. And Terry said as well, commercial vehicles was particularly applicable to this group. So there is such a need. And unfortunately, we have to look more at the signals, the way the market is preparing, than looking at the current production. We've had 3 installations so far this year, or 3 installation commitments so far this year. The first one at Hallberg, which was announced just on Monday of this week in Germany. That's 15,000 tons per year that they're preparing for, 300,000 engine equivalents. They have 2 products currently in production at relatively low volume, and there are 4 more projects that are under discussion or under development. So most of this 300,000 engine equivalent opportunity is growth opportunity, not replacement. We also have the installation at the University of Alabama for the Caterpillar development that's funded by the US Department of Energy. And I think this is a wonderful endorsement where industry and academia and the government all show that there's a need for stronger materials in the commercial vehicle sector, and that CGI is a prime candidate. And here in Europe, we announced in February and we installed in February at this undisclosed European commercial vehicle foundry. And I think this is really a stronger signal than when an independent foundry installs, because the independents have to install early to get ready. The captive foundries, the foundries that belong to the car or truck companies, they know exactly what's coming. They only invest when there's a program to produce. So that's a very strong signal. And also in China, the majority of our activity in China is related to commercial vehicle. So although we've had a tough year, it's still clear to us that commercial vehicles are the biggest growth opportunity and will long-term be the biggest contributor. I mentioned earlier that Navistar has received approval for the emissions of the revised 13-liter engine. They just announced that at the end of April. And previously they had said that showroom date to start selling the engines again would be June. But as they've now had this early approval, we can expect the sales to begin and to ramp up a little bit faster than we did before. It's another wait and see. As many of you know, that for Navistar to solve this emissions challenge, they purchased the emissions solution from Cummins. And as a part of that package, they also were required to make the Cummins 15-liter engine available in the trucks. So we don't know what the split will be between the Cummins 15-liter and the Navistar 13-liter going forward. They're both good engines, but whatever that split is, it will be a lot better than the second half of 2012. Let's talk a little bit about the Petrol engine. It remains on schedule for the start of production this year. It's not just the first Petrol engine, but it's also the highest volume CGI engine in the world. It will start slow because we need that safety, and then it will ramp up. But it's destined to go above 300,000 engine equivalents per year, and that is all incremental volume. And on top of the volume, we have again this follower reaction to see how the whole market responds. The installation is currently ongoing in Mexico. We don't know the launch plans yet and the announcement plans from the OEM. But when they do announce, we know that they'll come out with a real splash because it's such an impressive engine. It sets new benchmarks in the industry, and that should really motivate the follower reaction. I think this is also a good opportunity to comment on machinability, and one of the questions was, is there anything that's stopping CGI? And in the old days it was machinability. If you go back to the late 1990s, the OEM said we can't machine it, at least not efficiently enough, so we can't commit. And we found solutions to that. And then they said, well, those solutions are okay for commercial vehicles because we only make 50,000 or 75,000. And the solutions are okay for V-diesels because they only run 100 or 200,000. But now we have an example of an OEM committing to production over 300,000. And that either shows that machining has really come of age, which I believe is the case, and that petrol engines have been pushed so hard that they now need stronger materials. And whether it's one or a combination of the two, it's all good news for SinterCast and CGI. We also have growth opportunities in the industrial power sector, as we showed earlier, together with automotive components like exhaust manifolds and turbocharger housing and clutches. This represents about 10% of our volume, so it's still small, but it's one of my favorite fields to work in. We don't yet have high volume production, but we're growing now the foundation for it. And it may be surprising when you look at our installations, 8 of our 36 installations are actually at foundries for industrial power. And so that's preparing the groundwork. You may recall that we announced back in October of 2011 an installation at the Toakoki foundry in Japan. And we said that this was for large marine components, but I haven't ever actually shared with the shareholders what the components are. That development has been going really quite well, and we're very busy with it. And I thought now we could show a picture of the components. These are cylinder liners for large marine and stationary engines. They're up to 1 meter in diameter, and they weigh from 3 tons to 9 tons per piece. And these are the liners that we produce the piston rings for at the Deros Federal Mogul foundry here in Gothenburg, and also that we're supporting the pre-production at for the Daishin foundry in Korea. And you may wonder what type of an engine this size of cylinder liner goes in. And so we have this nice picture to give you a feel for those engines. And it's really fun to work in this field because it is the same engine technology, just on a completely different scale, and it's a completely new challenge for us with a different solidification time. One of those liners is anything from around 50 to 200 engine equivalents. So they may not make many pieces in a day, but they have the potential to make a lot of engine equivalents. So a really exciting and fun development. We can also look at the growth opportunity in installations, and this is a tough act to follow. We had record installation in 2011 with 6 new installations, a record again in 2012 with 9 million Swedish crowns in installation revenue. And now we've had a good start to 2013. We have the announcements, as I said, from Hallberg, from this undisclosed European OEM, and also from the University of Alabama. But we've been busier than that in the field. And there have been 2 installations that we secured last year, which are being commissioned this year. So we have the 2 undisclosed installations, the one in Asia for marine applications, not Toakoki, but another one, and here in Europe. And they were both finished in February, and installation acceptance was signed off. The Tupi installation in Mexico is ongoing. Our engineers will be back again next week for the final visit, and hopefully we have that fully commissioned in early June. And the University of Alabama and Hallberg in Leipzig are both scheduled for this summer. So we're set to commission 5 new installations in a 7-month period. And for our field engineers, that's the busiest patch that we've ever had. 3 installation commitments so far this year, but more to come. I don't know that we can have a 3rd record. That's really tough, but we're not finished. And it will certainly be a good year. It's already a good year. 3 installations for us is at least average. So last year at the AGM, we introduced what we call the System 3000 Plus, this automated system where the foundry delivers a ladle and we make the base treatment, automatically make the correction and return it to the foundry so they can start casting. And you may recognize this picture from the annual report. We see that there are 4 wire feeders in the foreground, and in the background there's 5 sampling modules. So it's more than 2 times bigger than a normal installation. And the installation, as I say, is underway in Mexico. And this is a picture from when our engineers left at the end of the 2nd installation visit. So the idea is that Tupi will deliver a ladle into the central station, and it will receive the first treatment, and then it can move either to the north station or the south station for the correction. So it has 2 different corrections, and they can pick up the ladle from either of those and move over to keep the line running at full speed. You may remember from the press release that the requirement for this installation is 1 ladle every 4 minutes. Yeah? And it's to run 9.2 hours per day without stopping. So it's our largest installation. The equipment would be in behind. For initial volume, they will transfer the ladles by forklift, but as the volume ramps up, we'll introduce an automatic trolley that will shuttle the ladles automatically between the central station and the north and south stations. So they just drop it off in the middle and pick it up when it's finished. So very efficient. In terms of our growth opportunities, we can also look at the new development for the ductile iron. We first presented our ductile iron development at the GIFA World Foundry Trade Fair in June of 2011. We've now had 2 years of internal development and field trials, and we're now set to introduce the technology at the Ductile Iron Society meeting in America in a few weeks. And after that, to establish some reference customers and to support the development of this new product. You have seen from the annual report that there's really a massive amount of ductile iron produced in the world. And you see in the 2nd column some 20 million tons per year of ductile iron production. But most of it is simple parts, and they don't need process control, and they can't afford process control. So we have to focus on the high value added parts, and that would be primarily safety components, or components that have problems with casting defects like shrinkage and porosity. What does the business model and what does the product look like? Well, the product will look much the same as it does in CGI. The sampling cup you will all recognize as being very similar to the CGI sampling cup. We need to keep it the same. We've put so much development in that cup to make it as high resolution as possible. If we were to change it, we would just be losing our accuracy. So of course the best thing is for it to look largely the same. The equipment will be slightly different, and the software, it's still thermal analysis software and a display of information to the operator. So it will look largely the same. It will all be recognizable as the SinterCast brand, but it will be slightly different. Our goal is to provide an accurate measurement. And the trials that we've done just in the last month in Asia in preparation for the introduction at the Ductile Iron Society meeting, we're quite positive. They showed that we have the accuracy and the resolution that will allow us to make a contribution. But we still need to wait and to see how the foundry will use it. Some foundries might use it almost on an every ladle basis to measure the iron and make a control adjustment, kind of like we do on CGI. Some might use it at the end of each ladle as a quality control check. Some might only bring it out onto the floor when they have a problem and make spot testing to see if they can solve the problem. And maybe even some foundries will call in SinterCast as a consultant to measure and to help them solve different problems. So obviously, depending on the way people use it, both the product and the business model will evolve. And at this stage, we will introduce it. The burden on the technology is exactly the same as it is in CGI. It has to pay for itself. Yeah? We have to improve the efficiency and reduce the scrap of the ductile iron foundries in a way that they can have a net economic benefit. And we really look forward to introducing that and supporting that evolution. So in summary, if we look out then at what can happen in the balance of 2013, we expect increased series production. We have these good signals with refilling of the Navistar pipe and the US diesels ramping up. So it's all reasonable to expect further growth, at least during the pipe filling phase. The US diesel introductions may be one of the most exciting things for SinterCast in the last 10 years, and really curious then to see the follower reaction. Likewise for the petrol engine start of production. It's a real breakthrough. I think the breakthrough will come with the OEM announcement, and we look forward to seeing when that will happen, and to follow on that. We'll certainly let the shareholders know as quickly as possible. But again, the follower reaction, how will others respond when an iron engine comes out to be smaller, lighter, and more performant than an aluminum engine? 3 installations so far, more to come. We've spent a lot of effort in the last couple of years and money developing our resources, adding primarily to our sales effort and specifically in Asia, and we're still investing in that market. And we all know that we have to convert from an investment phase to a payback phase, and that's the focus of the team. And a lot of the installations that we look at for the rest of this year are indeed based in Asia. We look forward to the ductile iron launch and to supporting the evolution of that product. The first thing is to get reference customers and helping the product evolve and showing other customers how they can benefit from it. And based on all of the signals, the current production and the installations and the installation outlook, we're absolutely on track for another positive cash flow result. And that's our job on the operations side, to achieve the positive cash flow so we can put the board in a position to continue to propose dividends to our shareholders. Thank you.
Thank